Father God, we just come before you. Lord, I thank you for whatever you have to say tonight. Lord, I ask that you come in and you speak, that I get totally out of the way of you. Lord, I thank you for this message. I thank you that you will be with us and your presence is here tonight. We just give you all the praise. Amen. Have any of you ever played that game at your house, especially maybe those that have kids? I don't know. Have you played that game called What's That Smell? Where's that? I'm saying, I mean, we turned it into a game. We turned it into a game at our household. You can get everybody involved. Let's figure out what that is, you know? And I didn't say it was a fun game. Just saying. I don't know. Maybe I was that type of mom that turned everything into a game. I don't know. But maybe you can relate to where you first, just going about your business, getting ready for your day, and you take a walk into the living room or something, or maybe it's the bathroom, wherever in your house, you're just like, just a little whiff. You're like, maybe that's just my imagination. Never mind, whatever. It's just caught a tiny little whiff. So you're going on about your day, and you just, okay, don't worry about it. It didn't take up that much space in your mind. But it's day 2. You're walking through again, and you're like, wait a minute. There's really something there. It's no longer my imagination. But maybe you're like me and you grab the Febreze bottle. Like, yes, I've now acknowledged there's a smell, but I'm just going to spray. And I personally will waste half that bottle because I'm like, I don't know where you're at. I'm spraying the air. I'm spraying the couch. I don't know what it is, but we're no longer going to be smelling this right now. So go with me on this. I get that maybe you wouldn't carry it to this extreme, but perhaps you've been in a place in a season in your life like me where maybe you do, where you wake up on day 3 and dadgummit, it's still there. So do you just keep getting up every day and you're facing this smell and you keep grabbing the Febreze bottle until now it's just become autopilot? You're no longer even waiting for the smell. You're just like, wait, knowing that there's going to be something there. So I'm just going to go ahead and deal with it. Until one day there becomes a reality check. Maybe it's because your Febreze bottle is now completely empty. You're forced to say, this isn't going to work anymore. Or maybe there's just wisdom that suddenly pops up that says, oh, what I'm doing is not working. That's what we all say is the definition of insanity, when you keep doing the same thing expecting different results. But no, lo and behold, what you're doing is not working. So now, smell is overpowering everything. And I'm happy for all of you if you've never experienced anything like this. I don't know if you've had kids with gym bags. I don't know if you found the half-eaten sandwich that molded under their bed. You can blame it all on the kids. Sometimes it's you, But I'm just saying, smell is everywhere. It's now invaded your home. You're like, I don't want to be in here anymore. Maybe this is a person that's happened in your car and, what once was a peaceful car ride to work has now got you hanging your head out the window just for an attempt of a breath of fresh air, So you have this reality check that says, this isn't working. I'm going to have to track this thing to its source. So if you're in your home, you're maybe you've engaged the family. Let's all, sniff test this thing and track it. Locate it to wherever the offensive thing is. So we're just going to say, as we've been talking about closets so much lately, we're going to say, okay, we've tracked it to the door of the closet. Now, I'll tell you, I don't want to open that door. Really don't. I really do not want to see what's on the other side, but I've got a choice. I have a choice to say, I'm going to just keep living like this with this stinking up my household, or I'm going to open that door. Now, we've talked so far in this series about doing this journey is so great because we know it's not great, but it's easier because we know the Lord's gone before us. So the Holy Spirit's walking beside us and we can call our tribe to help us through this journey. But I'll be very honest about my attitude when I go to that door. I could care less who wants to hold my hand through this thing. I don't care. Doesn't make the smell any easier to deal with just because a buddy is with you. I have an attitude about it. I don't want to hear anybody advise me on how to do this. Unless you're going to shut your mouth and go in there for me, I don't want to hear it, I will be honest. My version of this in my little fantasy land is that my husband comes in as like a knight in shining armor and says, I will handle this for you, okay? But I married someone who has like a gag reflex that, like I thought about it, like I want him to slay this stinky dragon, but his gag reflex would never allow him to complete this quest. I mean, this is just not gonna happen, okay? Or if it is gonna happen, it's gonna create more problems that I've got to deal with. It's just not really the answer. So my house has been taken over. My refuge, my place of peace is gone. And my option is either keep living like this or open that door. Be willing to go in there. I've got to face it. And I've got to not only face it, but I've got to do what it takes to remove it. So through this Get Naked journey, we've taken off some layers. We've had ones where we said, hey, I can just cast these off. We talked about drop kicking them to Jesus. I can just cast it off. And then we've had the layers where we said, hey, we don't know, who put these on us, and we may not know where they came from, or perhaps we had a layer that we can look at it and say, I put this on me, but I had no idea the cost that came with it. So we've walked through those steps, okay? But these things like this that are in the closet, these things that are kind of trying to curl up and die somewhere, these things that the smell of them has overtaken our household and our lives and our minds and our relationships and our behaviors, these things, it would kind of be silly to say, oh, we could just cast that off. It's not reality. We may have tried, we cut the other things off. We had the whole lesson on the things that came attached to that, the jacket, the things that we're wearing. And we've got to allow the Lord to help us cut that off. But what about when something you've been wearing so long has taken up residence and it's become rooted? It's developed roots that go down in you. I want you to have two pictures as we go through this tonight. One, I want you to carry that picture of the roots, okay? Something has been planted in you and it developed roots. It was allowed to sit there too long because you kept going. It smells. I don't like the way it smells, but you kept trying to cover it up, kept trying to avoid it. So it was allowed to develop some deep roots, okay? I want you to have that image in your mind. And the other image I want you to have in your mind is of stereotypical, let's just say homeless woman, okay? If you've seen a homeless woman walk in the streets, that it is obvious she hasn't bathed in a long time, okay? And she's been wearing the same clothes for a long time. And I've worked with the homeless community, and I will say this, when somebody has reached that shape, that stage of wearing something so long and not being cleansed, that literally the clothing can begin to adhere to their skin. Now, I know that's not a pretty picture, okay? It sounds kind of, but it's that thing of it adheres to the point that when we go to take it off, if it's not done in the right way, it rips open wounds, okay? It literally you go to take that thing that doesn't belong off, it takes a piece of them with it. So two pictures. One, roots, okay? The second is something that you've worn so long that it's literally adhered to you and become part of you. We're going to name some of those things, okay? Now, there are so many, but we'll talk about a few tonight. And then it's going to be Holy Spirit revelation as time goes on. It's going to be your willingness to sit in this stuff and look at it and say, your willingness to open that closet door and go, what's in here? One of the things that can take root or adhere to us is trauma. Now, that word in the culture right now is thrown around everywhere, okay? There's been more understanding about what it can do to us. I mean, you're not going to, any social media, anything you go to, whether it's in the church or it's in the secular world, trauma is a common word right now. But do you drop kick trauma? Do you just cast it off like you're casting a net? How do you do that if it's literally become so rooted in you? You go to cast it off and you discover you're kind of attached. You're going along with it, So trauma can form your identity. It can become so deep that it forms your identity. Sometimes we can even call it our personality, the things that we start doing, our behaviors. But really, we'll trace it back, that might not be who we really are. That's who we've become. That's how we were shaped due to things we've been through. We may recognize it. Oh, I have trauma. I'm just going to cut that right out. It doesn't really seem to work. You kind of end up getting stuck in a cycle. You want so desperately to be free, and you're like, but this thing just seems to have its hooks in me. And I'm going to go on tonight, and I'm going to talk about more things besides trauma, but I want to say right here, I'm not trained. This is a subject that, some people could shy away from. It can be you want to be real careful not to hurt anybody, offend or hurt or wound anybody. So I'll say I'm not trained. The only reason that I can sit here and talk about trauma or anything else is I've experienced it. I've lived it. My trauma is I've had those significant one-time events that were so traumatic that the damage lasted for years. I have trauma in my life that's ongoing, the kind that you go, Lord, why don't you just take this out immediately? Why is this allowed for me to walk it out? So I don't take it lightly that I'm saying any of this to any of you. And I ask that you also give me a little bit of grace. No, I'm not professionally trained. This is the kind of like the school of hard knocks. That was my education. So trauma's one. Grief is another. I've had I call it strange. I don't know quite the word for it. I've had a very strange experience walking out my life to have had so many mothers that I know have lost sons. So many. I mean, you're talking about car wrecks, homicides, overdose, suicide, you name it. I have had a strange, privilege. I don't know what the word is that the Lord has allowed me to sit close to mothers who have lost sons. So for me or anyone to ever say the things that are said, which is, why don't you just get over the grief? They're in a better place. Oh, but he works all things for the good. These things that we say when we're trying to get people just to cast it off, just to put it off of them. But you don't do that with grief. Grief buries in. Hasn't it been long enough? I mean, shouldn't you be past that by now? How about he can only give you what you can handle? We hear that a lot, And so I don't think there's that quick, easy answer to these things, okay? Clothes of grief, those clothes of mourning, those grave clothes, they can become part of us. And I want to say it's perfectly understandable. I don't think we should be judged for reaching a place where we're wrapped up in it. Betrayal. There's many forms of betrayal, but maybe it's a friend that just cut you off with no explanation and you just lose them. Maybe a spouse leaves you. Maybe people have lied about you. So betrayal in itself is tough enough. It can take up some resonance. It can take root. But what about when there's no closure? What about when you don't get to figure this out with that friend? What about if the spouse is just gone and now you're living this life that you never expected to live? All these things, are they perfectly understandable how they could take up root? But bottom line, regardless of how or where they came from, if they're not being looked at, if you're not tracking it to the source, it can begin to invade. It can begin to take over. So all these situations that we're naming, we could name some more like we talked about, they can leave us feeling pretty, defenseless. Not only does our pain become part of us, but what comes attached with it can also become part of us. Shame, hopelessness, bitterness, unforgiveness. What about pride? What about justification? All these things kind of have their own root system. And all these things that I just talked about are things that happen to us. What about things that you chose? What about, decisions that you made? That what's left over from what you haven't dealt with, what you haven't faced, what you haven't repented of, stinking up your household. We also talked about last session about the coping mechanisms that we have to deal with all the stuff we're trying to carry. So what about the coping mechanisms that we don't address, that become sin in our life? Those are also those things taking up residence in our closet, stinking up everything. So we have all these things, and maybe as I'm speaking, maybe it's not something that I've said, but maybe something's being brought to your mind that you know full well you haven't dealt with, you're not looking at. I know people that have walked through unimaginable grief, and not once did they say it was okay, not once did they act like it hasn't completely changed or affected their life. They're making a daily decision not to curl up and die with it. It doesn't mean that it's all roses. They're not faking it. But they are saying, I'm not going to let this thing, take over my entire life. I'm sure they have days where they may not feel as successful in that as in other days. I've known people, I myself, trauma. Am I going to look at this thing and go, I can completely justify why this would change my life and make it stink? I can do that. I'm just going to leave it here because you know what? It makes sense. This happened to me. It was wrong. I'm going to say, I can stay just like this and it's just fine. Or we can look at these things and say, yeah, you know what? It makes sense why we would feel the way we do. It makes sense why it would change and disrupt our lives and alter the course of them. But maybe I'm going to go ahead and open this door, and I'm going to go in and I'm going to look at this thing. I'm going to dig through the piles, the boxes, whatever it is, and go, what is it in here that I'm not dealing with? What is it in here that I have declared I have the capabilities of continuing to Febreze this baby and just keep going? And, I asked the Lord, I've really been talking to him about what are the answers for this, for these really tough things? What does work? We are really great, especially in the Christian culture, of giving this covering blanket general statement of Jesus. Now that sounds awful. Please, nobody get mad at me because you're like, why would you say that? We say the big thing. We go, well, Jesus will take care of that, and Jesus covers that, and Jesus will do that for you, and he'll go with you. And then we go home with the stink, and we're like, but I don't know how or what, or he went on the cross for you. He died on the cross for you. Why aren't you acting like he's already taken care of it? So I've really been talking to him about what few things could we discuss tonight that we could understand and go home with. I'm looking at this thing, whether it happened to me, whether I chose it, but I know that it's down deep inside me. And Lord, I'm so ready. I'm ready. I'm saying I will do whatever it takes. I'm going to go in that closet and I'm going to do whatever it takes to, the word eradicate comes to mind. Remove, not continue to live with. Get it out, okay? So one of the things that he'll do is he'll use fire. Now, I will be honest also again and say when I go to that closet door, I actually think, can I just burn the house down? I would rather just set fire to this thing than deal with it. And I'm dramatic that way sometimes. I'm just like, I'm not doing this. I'll just burn it to the ground. I'm done. Or, it's kind of like when you go see all those dirty dishes in your sink, you're like, can we just throw them away? Can we just buy new ones? That would be so much easier. But he will use fire. And one way he'll use fire is he will literally burn something to the ground, like saying, this can no longer stand. We see a lot of this in the Old Testament, but one of the things that came to mind was idols. And granted, it was Moses that burned the golden calf to the ground. God will use various ways to get these things done. But I'm just saying, sometimes something just can't be left to stand. There are things in our lives that he may heal, and there's remnants of it that get to stay and they get restored and renewed. Sometimes he literally just says this thing is burned into the ground to ashes. Because what does he do with ashes? He says, give them to me and I'm going to give you beauty. He wants to burn it to the ground to give you the component that you now hand to him in an exchange. Okay? So with fire, he will burn it to the ground. Deuteronomy 9:21, it talks about just what we said. I took your sinful thing, the calf which you had made, and I burned it with fire and I crushed it, grinding it very small until it was fine as dust, and I threw its dust into the brook that came down from the mountain. So that's Moses. Moses was the one that burned it. But that just gives me such a picture of God coming in and going, you know what? This will not stand anymore. Okay? I do not have this in my notes, but it just came to mind, so I will share. In my personal life, I had something burned to the ground. Now, this is a little bit of a different story. It wasn't necessarily an idol like we think of, but it is something that had taken up residence in my mind and my life for a very long time. So I shared in one of our other sessions, I shared that about putting on the hospital gown, and I shared that was my personal story. I had my son. I was abused. I'm careful about which graphic picture I paint. I don't want to trigger people, but let's just say sexually abused as a very young girl. And that occurred at a public bathroom at a public park, So when I share that, it's just this thing of, that sounds awful, but you know what? I know the story and I know how it ends. And I know what he allowed not to stand. So years later, I was very young when this happened, and I didn't face it for 25 years. It sat there. I didn't talk about it. I didn't tell people what had happened to me. I carried by myself. And to say that it took up root, to say that there was evidence all around of what I was carrying, yes, there was, okay? But at the season of my life where God said, it's time to go back and face this thing. The stink of it is evident everywhere. It's affecting not only you, it's affecting everybody around you. Go back and face this thing. So, I put on my battle armor and I'm prepared to go back and fight and slay this thing and go with my sword, And I actually went back to the location that it occurred. I went with my husband late one night to go face what had happened. And like I said, public park, public bathroom is where this abuse occurred. And so I get that picture of this, I'm on fire, righteous anger, flipping tables in the temple type mood, okay? I get there and my husband and I are just, like I said, 10 o'clock at night. Get there, it's dark, but all the park lights are on where it lights up the trail and lights up the little picnic tables. And I go to get out of the car, and in my mind, I'm getting out of the car to go directly to the location that it happened. But I got out and I'm like, wait a minute, I'm not recognizing. Guys, 25 years later, it didn't dawn on me. Things might change, in 25 years. So I went back to the car, frustrated, because at first I told my husband, I got this all by myself. You stay in the car. But when I couldn't find it, I went back to the car to let him know what was going on. Let's just go home. Forget it, And he said, how about we just wait a minute? We were here for a reason. How about we just get out, walk around, and see what the Lord has to say about it? So we got out. We started walking around, and eventually we sat down on some picnic tables that are on a concrete foundation. And even though it's now like 10:30 at night, strangely, there's the family there eating McDonald's. So we're sitting at a table, the family's there eating their McDonald's, playing, laughing, having fun. As I'm looking around going, Lord, why? am I here? Why did you say right now? Why was I so revved up to go fight this thing and there's nothing for me to fight? And I'm looking around as I'm talking with the Lord, and I'm looking around and I look down at the foundation underneath the table that I'm sitting at with my husband. And I look down and I realize it has places where you now can tell where pipes used to run. And it has like where a drain in the floor used to be. And it has the imprints in the concrete of where something must have been. And it finally starts dawning on me, this was the bathroom. Okay? It's dawning on me that, okay, this is where the stalls were, and this is where the sink were, and this was where all the things that you could picture in a second in your mind because they had been imprinted in that traumatic moment. So I can see it. And guys, in that moment, I realized what was standing one time has now kind of been burned to the ground. It's literally now rubble. Okay, so my story is, it not only was made rubble, it was fire. He said, this can no longer stand. It may have been standing in my mind all along, but he's saying this can no longer stand. And what the cool turnaround is that there was life happening. I in my mind had frozen it in this place, not realizing all along it could not stand and that life came from it. So there can be a fire that comes in and goes, this will not stand. And there also is refining fire. Okay? So if you're not familiar with refining fire, the Bible references it several times, and also just in, the natural world, fire is used for metals to heat it to a certain point to raise all the impurities to the surface so they can be scraped off. So I hope you're able to follow along with what I'm tying these in, which is we've got these things. They're buried deep. He's got various ways to draw them out and deal with them, okay? Our obedience, our submission, our willingness is pretty much what's required of us, okay? So Job is a perfect example of someone that has a lot of heartache, a lot of trauma, a lot of grief, you name it. Job has it. Job 23:10 says, but he knows, meaning the Lord, the way I take. He knows what I've gone through is what that's saying. He knows where I'm going. And when he has tested me, that word tested means when he's examined me, when he's investigated me, when he's looked in and see what those things are, and they come forth, I shall come forth as gold. Okay? Fire isn't usually fun. Walking through it, being refined. Because it's kind of like I go, okay, Lord, I'm saying yes. I'm going to open this closet door. I'm going to go in and face whatever this is. And now I'm on fire? That's not, you kind of go, I was obedient. Why is this now even harder? There is a season when you finally start looking at that stuff and being willing to address it where the heat does get turned up. You will feel like you've signed up for something you didn't quite want to deal with. But I'm going to ask you, I'm going to say, do you want to live in the stink? Are you going to stay in the fire? Are you going to allow him? I call it, as eloquent as it sounds, I call it swimming in the crap pool. And I know that just sounds, but literally in my mind, it's like all the crap comes to the surface. And for a while there, it feels like you're literally just hanging out with it. It will get cleaned off. It will get scraped off, but it's got to come to the surface first. Okay. So fire, and then his blood. We talk about betrayal, and Hebrews 12:24 says, Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant, and to the sprinkling that speaks better things. Some translations say that it doesn't say speak better things, it says speaks a better word. So Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant, and to the sprinkling that speaks a better word than that of Abel. So let me break that down for you. Meaning, his blood speaks a better word than that of Abel, and Abel represents vengeance. Okay, so you have a betrayal. It's taken root. You're you're playing it like a broken record in your mind. It's taking up resonance. It's digging deeper. You come up with justifications of why they're wrong. You come up with pride of why you're right. This is, it's just so much that begins to take hold of you. And you literally have to look at that and say, I'm going to shut all that up, and I'm going to choose instead to focus on the blood of Jesus, which has already covered this, okay? His blood speaks a better word than any of these words that I'm saying. His blood, which brings, forgiveness, which brings peace, which brings healing. That's what his blood does, far better than the blood of vengeance. Far better than this thing of you that thinks you've got to take up the sword to fight for yourself and fight for vengeance. So someone betrays you, someone smears your reputation, someone cuts you off. Fill in the blank with what represents betrayal to you and uproot it. Every time you start trying to speak a word to yourself about it, or the enemy starts trying to speak to you about it, the way you uproot it is you start talking about this better word, who is Jesus and his blood and what it's capable of doing, what it's already done and what it will continue to do. You may not get your closure. You may have said, this thing is going to sit here in my closet, stinking up everything until they do their part. Until they make it right, because they're the ones that did wrong. And you know what? You're going to be sitting there perhaps a long time in some smelly stuff, because that doesn't always come. I want to say probably rarely does that come. So we have fire and blood and water. Now, there are so many different ways that water could apply in this situation. And I actually looked it up. Water is mentioned 722 times in the Bible. So I'm going to encourage you to get in the Word yourselves and start looking at what will water do? What will it cleanse? But I'm just going to give you a visual tonight. When we have these things going on, we want to say, okay, Lord, I'm hurting and I've got all these things going, happening, these deep, deep things. And we have things in our life that we've recognized make it feel a little bit better for just a minute. Me personally, worship. I've got these traumatic things. They're painful. I go to worship. Okay? It felt good. Worship's a good thing. There's nothing wrong with worship. Lord, I'm so glad I get to come back to you and worship again. And I walk away and I've sprayed it and it's been sprinkled by you and it feels good. Okay. It feels good. In my mind, I'm like, okay, I did a good thing. I pressed in for a moment, but then I go home and it still stinks. And I had a really hard time making sense of that. I had a really hard time understanding why. If I'm doing the very thing that I know that is the right thing to do, which is worship, maybe I went and spent a little time in the Word, just a little. Okay? Again, is there anything wrong with that? Absolutely not. Okay? But the picture I want to give you is perhaps living a lifestyle of immersion, of literally being so hungry that it's not this thing of spraying on it with his word and his worship, which, guys, they're good. They're wonderful. And, but if you get in your head that I did this thing now, I'm going to run back and all of it's going to be dealt with, you can start to get resentful towards the Lord. You can start to say, I'm doing all this. Why am I not seeing evidence? And he's saying, maybe you need to clear your calendar so you have more time for more than just a spray. Maybe that worship at church was amazing, but maybe you need to turn everything off at home and you need to get on your face before the Lord and immerse yourself in him. Just like we talked about last time, maybe lay down chasing all the health food for just a minute, but there's nothing wrong with that. Maybe all that time you spent planning and researching and figuring that out, instead you turn it off and you immerse yourself in him. Yes, his word. It's, Ephesians says we are washed by his word. He washes the bride with his word. Immerse yourself. How desperate are you for the stink to be gone? How much do you want to stand before people and go, you know what? Yes, I've been through this and it was horrific and it was traumatic. And yes, it changed me. But yet, you know what? I spent time with the Lord. I immersed myself in him. And when I come out of that, it doesn't mean the grief is gone, but now I can understand what he wants me to do with it. And my grief now has a purpose. It's not my stopping place. I don't have to live with the grave clothes on forever. Maybe you come out of this immersion, whatever that looks like, because when you're immersed, those things, those clothes that have been adhered, they start to soften. They start to loosen. So you know what? It's like, this is the way of the gentle removal. We want it to be over so fast that sometimes we're willing just to rip it off. I don't know how many of y'all are Band-Aid people where you're like, just rip that thing off. Quit just gently peeling. But you know what? Picture if whatever you were going to rip off, you had taken 5 minutes. We've discussed 5 minutes can feel like a long time, but what if you just let it soak off gently? How different is that? Yes, things are going to happen by fire. And absolutely, did we need to hold on to the fact that his blood has already covered things and that we don't have to pick up our sword all the time and it doesn't have to be by our vengeance and we don't have to prove what happened? But there is something so powerful about you getting to a place where you humble yourself so much to say, there is nothing more important than this immersion happening. There is nothing in my life. There's not my agenda. There's not a relationship. There's not an activity. There's not a job. There's not anything more important than whatever it takes to be willing to spend this season immersed. Now, I don't think for every season of your life you walk around in this shape. Okay, what I'm saying? You'll have seasons where this isn't what is required for what's going on with you. But if you have something that's stinking, if you have something that's taken root that you just can't seem to figure out why it won't go away, why am I not seeing evidence of what God could use it for? All I know is it's pain. All I know is it's destructions. All I know is the awfulness. I want hope. I want all this, but have you done what it takes to take it from here to here? I mean, think about baptism, the symbol of, death to life. There's something that happens when you allow yourself to go through this process. Man, if you get dunked sometimes, ankle deep is way different than in over your head. You may have been trying to see evidence and fruit and success in ankle deep living. Because you know what? We've been drowning for so long that the very thought of anything else taking us in over our heads sounds like more drowning. This isn't drowning, y'all. This is resting. You get in that water with him, you immerse yourself in him, and you literally get to lay back with him. Washing by his word and washing by worship and washing and just soaking in his presence is, guys, it's healing. It's peace. It's gentle. It's just, I highly recommend it if you can't tell. All right, so fire, blood, water. The last thing I want to close with tonight is, we need to do all these things. There may be a combination of them going on at one time, and man, that can feel interesting. Something's on fire, being burnt to the ground. I'm soaking in his presence, and I have knowledge of his blood. It's a lot going on, But there is something that happens when the Lord speaks. And let me just give reference to that. Recently, my husband and I went through a wonderful situation where we had some people come and speak over us. And we call it presbytery. Other churches may call it something different, but we just allow a space and time for the Lord to come and speak through people. And you know, I was so hungry. We're going to go on in this series to talk about, we've taken everything off. We're going to go on to this series about sitting in the naked, and we're going to talk about what to put back on, okay? I was so excited for this time to come because in my mind, it's the equivalent of things being put on. I'm like, Lord, speak. Tell me what to do. Tell me what to wear. Tell me where to go. So excited and ready to be given this word. And yes, behind the scenes leading up to that, there was stripping away. There was releasing. There was a nakedness that had to happen to ready ourselves for that time, for that day, for that word. But the night before we were going to be spoken over and being given this word, the night before I was driving home, and I live out in the country, and as I'm driving, I'm looking out at the fields, I'm looking at all this stuff, and I heard the Holy Spirit say, take a good look, because tomorrow it will never look the same. And I was like, okay, And so I did take a good look. I took it in. I took in the barns, and I took in the deer running around, and I took in the houses, whatever. I just kind of absorbed. I took in the sky, just took in what does this look like right now? Because tomorrow it'll never look the same. So the next day we went and we had this time, a wonderful time of hearing exactly not what we wanted to hear, but what we need to hear in this season. It was so on point. It gave direction. It was just such a blessing. Truly believed that what the Lord had to say was spoken through people to us. And I will tell you, the next day, that day as I left there, nothing looked the same, and nothing ever will look like it used to. I've never had my vision so cleared. I've never had my mind so wiped clean of all the junk that's ever happened that's taken up residence. All it took was a word from Him, direction from Him. So I say all that to say, yes, there's going to be fire. Yes, there's going to be water. And we keep knowledge of His blood, but He also will have times where He looks directly at you and He speaks into your life. And He speaks. The thing has as what is it? He speaks and mountains fall into the sea. Is that? Yeah, mountains fall into the sea. So you need to go forward and be willing to open that door and go in that closet. If you're sitting around not willing to do anything, waiting for Him to come in and speak and just change the whole situation, He wants you to put your hand to the plow. He wants you to be willing to sign up for this. He wants to see your willingness. He wants to see your obedience. He wants to see your humbleness. He wants you saying, I will do whatever. Lord, I will do whatever you say. And in that process, there will come a time where He will just speak into your situation. And there will be things that you don't have to do all the hard work for. There are some things in your situation in your life that He is going to require you to walk it out A to Z. Sometimes it feels like back to C, back to, all over the place. It's not fun. It's not easy because He uses those situations to talk to you and teach you and develop your faith and develop your obedience. And He does all these things to mature and grow you. But there are things that He will just come into it and He will look at it and He will speak to it and say, tomorrow, this will not look the same. Like that. And, there is nothing like having your vision changed. There's nothing like those old patterns of behavior that came from trauma or came from abuse there's nothing like that grief that consumed you, that the next day you don't have an explanation other than He said, no more. I've got that for you. I went to the cross for that. This is covered. Okay? So this is our last week of the getting naked part. This is it, guys. We have gone from surface of the things we just try to control and expectations, regrets and sorrows, just all those little things that just trip us up day to day that we've gone through those. We've talked about how to get rid of them. We went to the next layer of these things that we just can't quite recognize or things we didn't know, the level that they were going to take from us. And now we've gone past the surface, past that next layer down to the deep, deep stuff. And I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that this is a learning process, a lifelong learning process of how to walk this out. But this is the last week of just getting naked. Next time we meet, we're going to be talking about sitting in the naked. What it's like. Sometimes we can think about something like naked, and we've talked about how that's not our favorite word. There's a stillness and there's a quiet in the naked. Because if you think about it, if we want to make it practical, if we all went naked, we wouldn't have laundry to do. You know what I'm saying? We wouldn't have clothes to shop for. I mean, sounds a little bit like perfection to me. Minus the all of us walking around naked part. But, I'm just saying, there's something that occurs when all these things that you've been wearing or having in your closet stinking up, they've required a lot of maintenance that you may not have realized. They've taken up a lot of your space. They've taken up a lot of your energy. Sitting in the naked, where you don't have all the busy work of maintaining all these things you've been juggling, it can feel pretty unfamiliar. It can feel pretty uncomfortable, okay? So we're going to go from all these things we talked about this week, and then we're going to step into, we got comfortable with naked in the beginning. Now we're going to get comfortable to a whole nother level, get comfortable with the stillness, get comfortable with the quiet. Okay. All right. I'm going to close this out in prayer. Lord, I praise you. I thank you. I ask that every word from you tonight just take up residence in hearts and minds and spirits, and that you continue to speak to the ladies regarding all of this, Father, that we can just trust you. We can willingly open that closet door because we know what you have on the other side. Even though there may be tough spots, we know that ultimately you're there with us, and ultimately you're going to use it for something amazing. God, we praise you. I ask that you just bless everyone.